Welcome to Wes Explains Why. In this video, I'm going to show you a game between Yasser Seirawan and Levon Aronian. It was played in 2014. A friendly blitz game, but nevertheless an entertaining and instructive game. But first, let's watch a video of Yasser Seirawan as he wins this game and see his reaction.
Ooh, it's so good. This is one of the nicest games I've ever played in my life.
Yep.
I can tell. I can tell. Okay, you've been lucky.
He loved it. He really loved that
sorry.
game. So let's see why this game is so entertaining. So Seirawan, playing white, played pawn to c4. He likes his English opening stuff. And Aronian played knight f6. So knight c3, Aronian goes for e6, knight f3, and now d5. So he's not wanting to play a standard English opening type of game. So Seirawan says d4, okay. Can transpose to the Nimzo-Indian. Now he relieves this tension here because he doesn't like that. Takes. And now queen a4. This is interesting because white doesn't have to play that move. This bishop's not really hanging after knight c6, so why does he do that instead of going directly for bishop g5? I think the answer is because having this knight on c6 makes it difficult for black to play c5 in many lines. And not that this c5 move is so great, but it's not always to white's taste, depending on who white is. And so for that reason, probably Seirawan went for queen a4, and this is a move that has been played by top grandmasters, including Aronian himself. And now bishop g5. So h6, and now already I think Seirawan goes wrong with bishop h4, because he should have taken on f6, as Aronian himself played against Anand in 2015 and won a nice game. But bishop h4, but that allows pawn to g5, and bishop g3, knight e4. Now hitting this guy. So Seirawan plays rook c1, holding that guy. He had an interesting possibility here of knight d2, crazy looking move. But the point is, if takes, and you think you can take this pawn, but after queen b3, knight e4, take, and e3, suddenly you start to see that the bishop here is extremely dominant in the position. Black's pawns here are extremely loose, and even though black is up a pawn, he's gonna be having a hard time in this position. So that's dangerous for black. Black would have to instead take on d2. After king takes d2, f5, f4, and this is a unclear position, and it's hard to say what's exactly going on here, but that's an interesting possibility. Anyway, rook c1, h5. So Aronian is going to trap this bishop here with h4, and Seirawan has to do something about that fast. Surprisingly, he ignored this guy and played pawn to e3, and after h4 he played bishop to e5, f6. I'm sure he saw this, and he played bishop e5, and he thought he was doing well. And his reasoning was that this is the exact same position with the Caro-Kann, with black having an extra tempo. So let's look at what he's talking about. So e4, c6, Seirawan knows the Caro-Kann. So in this line, g4, takes, check, knight e5, rook c8, d4, e6, h4, attacking this guy, bishop b4, ignoring that threat, h5, bishop e4, f3, knight f6. This is the exact same position, but it's as though black has played an extra move, queen a5, in the position. And Seirawan thought that having that extra move in the position should favor black, or in his case white, in the actual game, but it does not. And in fact, in this position, even if he doesn't play queen a5, plays anything else, this bishop is still lost. So that was an incorrect judgment from Seirawan, and he got himself into this position, and his bishop was lost. What should he have done in this position? He should have played, well, first of all, he cannot play h4 because then take, and this is simply a loose pawn, and this structure, this entire structure is not making a good impression at all. So he had to play knight to e5, hitting this guy, because now if h4, which is a bad move, then white can throw in knight c6 first. And if b takes c6, which is not a good move, then white has a really excellent move with bishop e5. Well, you may say, what's so excellent about it? Because f6, yeah, but then queen takes. Well, first of all, you gotta take this guy because the bishop's hanging, so take, and then bc. Then let's say if bc, and then bishop e5, f6, but then queen takes e6 check, and now a8 is hanging. So bishop d7 is forced, but then take on d5, and now e4 is hanging. So bishop f5, but then check again, and now you can't go back because the knight is dropping. So you have to play king f7, pawn to f3. Sure, he can take here, but then he loses his own piece as well. So that's not exactly winning a piece for black. Why not queen c6? Well, the answer is queen d7. If queen takes a8, then hg and f3, and knight f2 in this position, and things can get really messy for white in this position. Okay, so back to this position. Knight e5, h4, takes, bishop takes, pawn takes. What if queen d7 here? Because now this knight is pinned, this guy is not going anywhere. But surprisingly, white has bishop c7. You can only take one piece at a time. If queen c7, then well, white rescues this piece, and if pawn takes, then he can either play queen a5 or bishop a5 and save that piece. So white is doing fine in that position. Note also that once this bishop moves like this, pawn f3 becomes a possibility, or actually once the knight moves, pawn f3 always it becomes a possibility, so kick this knight out. So that's an additional point in the position. So anyway, Seirawan missed that, played bishop e5 here, and now takes, and his piece was lost. So he black to played bishop d7 because he can simply hold this knight, and this guy is not going anywhere. So Seirawan plays c4, and now if pawn takes, that's premature because takes, knight e7, knight takes. Now he has to take again, check, and now this guy is falling. So c6, but takes, and white has too much play in this position, and black is the one struggling to hold this position. So that's not good, which is why Aronian played a6, hitting this guy instead of taking it, played a6. Now cd from Seirawan, and after ab, queen c2, and both these guys are hanging. So Seirawan's not losing an extra piece. So Aronian played bishop f5, holding this guy, and allowed pawn takes knight, which is the correct decision. Now, I was watching this game and I was like, this guy is trapped anyway, so why don't you just solve this problem here with b6 and then take this guy next turn, and then don't allow him a dangerous pass pawn, which was in fact the right thing to do. But probably Aronian saw this and he was afraid of knight takes g5, amazingly. Because now if knight takes, then queen takes here, and now if takes, then check, and lots of problems. But black in fact could go knight d6. If he goes knight g3, attacking the queen with this bishop and also protecting it with this knight, then white has queen b3 and with a mate threat on f7. And if pawn takes here, then that's queen f7 is made, of course. If pawn takes knight, then bishop takes rook, and queen g8 is coming. So this is dangerous. So knight d6 instead holds f7. And now he's surely losing a piece because queen b3 now takes, and an additional threat of queen g5 in the position, and that is surely game over. So that was what Aronian likely missed, and he played pawn takes bishop already, which is a bad move because now cb, and white is back in the game. Now he played another strange move, rook a6. I'm not sure what he thought about this because queen c6 is not a threat in the position. Black can play queen d7 and hold it after rook b8. Maybe he thought rook b8 was too passive, but the thing is, rook b8 immediately attacks b7, so white is forced to do something about it. Whereas rook a6 does not. He has to waste another move to go for this. So I'm not sure exactly why he played rook to a6. And Seirawan simply gobbles up the pawn, castles. And now white could have played knight c6, hitting this queen and also threatening to promote, which he missed. Instead, he played queen takes pawn, which is, I mean, it's a reasonable move. But after take and take, Aronian goes knight d6, and now he's slowly getting ready to gobble up this pawn. So white has to act quickly about this, otherwise this is going to be lost. And again, he had knight c6 in the position, which he missed, and he simply castled. And now Aronian played rook b6, and the pawn was lost. Rook f to c1, rook takes b7. Seirawan now played a very human move, rook to c6. Now I can understand that, because allowing him to keep both rooks in the position gives him more chances to target this weakness on g5. Because if one of the rooks is traded, then he cannot target this guy, because the king comes forward and holds that easily against one rook. But with two rooks in the position, g5 becomes a serious weakness. So Seirawan keeps pieces on the board, and which allows him for more play because he's down a piece, and that's a perfectly fine human move. But surprisingly, the computer is showing rook takes b7 is even stronger, because after knight takes, the point is pawn to f3, and this bishop is going to be dominated. Because after rook a8, e4, bishop c8, and rook c7, black does not have time for rook takes a2, because this guy is dropping, and white's rook is sweeping the 7th rank, and he's going to start marching his pawns, and black is the one struggling to hold the draw in this position. So anyway, Seirawan missed that, played rook c6. Now Aronian, to protect this knight, went knight c4, but then that allowed Seirawan to simply take this extra pawn, and with the loss of this extra pawn, I think the game is no longer going to be a victory for black, because he's lost his most valuable pawn in the game. Instead, he should have played knight f7, kept this pawn alive, which keeps his winning chances alive. But he thought that after this, he gets in with his rook, and that gives him some play because of this weak pawn on f2. But that's not enough, because Seirawan was able to defend accurately in this position. Well, he first played, well, he could have played f3, but then that allows h3 takes, and bishop takes h3, which is really ugly. So he played h3 instead. And now Aronian simply took this pawn and says, okay, I take a pawn, I have a bishop for 3 pawns, and I'm still playing for the win. But if he wanted to play safe, he could have taken here and taken rook f2 is already a draw. So rook takes a2, rook c5, king h7. He doesn't want to lose this pawn with check, so king h7. Now f3, and he's getting ready to play e4. So Aronian goes king h6 so that he can hold this guy. Now if e4, then bishop h3, and then gh3, rook takes f3. And this pawn's also falling, so this is not good for white. White may still be able to draw, but that's not a safe choice. So he plays rook e5, and Aronian had to play bishop h3 to save himself, because rook takes f3, and now rook c6, king h5, rook c5, rook g3, king f1, rook h2, and black has good practical chances, though white can hold a draw with a move like rook c8. But this was Aronian's best chance. Instead, he played rook f6, which is a waste of a move, because that simply allows Seirawan to double. Now he plays bishop h3, but then Seirawan doesn't have to take here, he takes here. Now Aronian at this point probably realized he wasn't playing for the win anymore, and he had to fight for the draw. But if he had seen the tactical possibility of bishop g2, he could have drawn the game. But it's not easy to see because after it takes, you just lost a piece, right? But rook a3, and these two pawns are hanging. One of them is going to fall, and that's going to be a draw. But he missed that. And so he goes back, and now Seirawan gives this check. He's keeping an eye on this pawn because he could have got greedy with rook h4, but maybe he was afraid of rook g6 and Aronian ganging up on g2, so he played this first. But now Aronian had his final chance, rook g6, because now if take and take, rook d2, and all these pawns are paralyzed because this pawn can't move, right? This pawn can't move because d4 is hanging. If you play f4, then you create a hole on e4, and if you move this pawn, then your king is stuck on the back rank. And if you play a move like king h2, then bishop c4, bishop f1, and you start pressuring g2. So that was an excellent chance for Aronian to hold the draw here. So Aronian missed rook g6, played king f8, but then Seirawan simply takes on h4, and that's going to be an easy win because now these pawns are just too dangerous and unstoppable. Aronian tried to stop, but now d5 is protected. Rook b6, no problem. This is defended, so rook can't really do anything here. Rook h7 keeps going ahead, now threatening rook f5, so he goes rook g6, trying to play rook g7 next, but the trade is sufficient to win. Now a single rook and 4 pawns is going to be way too easy for Seirawan to win. I think Seirawan should have restricted this king here on the 7th rank with a move like rook a7, but it was a blitz game. He was in pressure, so he just kept moving fast, and so these next few moves are not so relevant as long as white's making progress and he's moving his pawns up. Now Aronian in pressure blundered with bishop a4. The game was lost, but this is even easier for white because now e5 and the pawn is moving. Rook takes, bishop is coming. And if takes, then of course rook takes, and 2 extra pawns is an easy win for Seirawan in this position. So e5, bishop here, d6. Now the pawns move an extra rank up. King g7, rook f6, and he brings his king around. He gives a few checks. Now reroutes his rook to the 7th rank, which he should have done in the beginning, but he's getting there again. And now finally gets king f6, and that's game over. Rook c4, f5, no problem, you can take this. But now I have rook 8, and this bishop is completely paralyzed. Aronian tried a final trick, rook d4, because now if e6, then rook takes d6, and he lost the pawn. But Seirawan held that with rook d8, and is now stopping e6, e7 now, or e6, d7, and black resigned. And it was a great win for Seirawan.